Good evening, everyone. It's now 7 o'clock, so we can start the standing meeting. So I'd like to remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded onto the council's website. And before we start, please make sure that we've got the mobile phones, we turn them on for silent, please. Item 1, apologies for absence. Received apologies from Councillor Collins and from Lisa Labour.
That's right. Yeah.
I'd also like to welcome a new co-opted member to the meeting. That's Charles Clark. Welcome, Charles. Feel free to. Item 2, minutes. Right, the minutes are on page 5 of the agenda. I move that the minutes of the Standards and Audit Committee held on the 9th of September 2021 be approved as a correct record.
Agreed.
Thank you. Does any member have any comments on the minutes at all? No?
Yeah, I think they probably were from not arising.
What page are you looking at?
Page 8.
Page 8. Okay.
It says here, Council on Energy referred to the 57 reports of suspected fraud and had received and questioned whether these were internal or external frauds, of which David Killingrove stated that he did not have those figures at hand but would be included in the statistics of the next committee report. I just want to find out whether this has been included in the report to the activity just not as arising. Correct?
No, I don't remember them.
No, I think you're correct actually, yeah. Embarrassingly, I'll have to share that separately if that's okay to the chair. Apologies for the.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll get it emailed on to.
Yeah, I'll do it as an addendum next time and
Okay.
share.
Okay, so if we do that and then we can forward it all, get it
Sure.
on to members, yeah? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for bringing that up, Councillor. Okay, are there any other comments on the minutes? That's not going to be on tonight anywhere else? No?
Nope.
Okay. Item 3, I have not agreed to any urgent items of business. So I'll move on to item 4, which is declarations of interest. Does anyone wish to declare an interest? Okay, if you do, when we go through, please just raise your hands and we'll add it on. Right, item 5, which is page 15 to 18 of the agenda, and that is the Regulatory Investigatory Powers Act RIPA activity report for 21-22 from April to September, and I believe Sean is going to present this report.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Lee Henley sends his apologies and asked me to present this. So it's considered, because there's been a lot of concerns around misuse of RIPA, the Regulatory Investigatory Powers Act, in the past, and there's a lot of case history around it as well. It got an awful lot of attention. So it's considered best practice for officers to bring a report through to a committee like the Standards and Audit Committee on a regular basis, which just sets out the amount of activity there is under both RIPA and NAFN, which we'll touch on in this report. It won't be the first time that we brought a report saying there has been absolutely no activity, but that's just as important to know there's been none rather than some as well. As I say, it's considered best practice. All RIPA authorising officers, including myself, went through a very long and intensive training session again just about 3 weeks ago. We have those annually, and again this sort of reporting is reinforced, and then people like David and his team also then carried on the sessions throughout the rest of the afternoon. So great deal of training and refreshing training goes on annually, as I say. So the table at 3.1.1 shows that for the first 6 months of this year there has been no RIPA activity, no RIPA approvals, and 3.1.2 and this again comes as part of the training, says RIPA should largely be last resort. We should always look to try and identify other ways of gaining the information where possible. And that shows that because of our collaboration with the police and other enforcement work and over work rather than COVID, that type of a RIPA has not been required, as I say, for this first 6 months of the year. Moving down to 3.1.4 shows the National Anti-Fraud Network, NAFN, as is slightly easier to say, requests. And you can see that there have actually been 6 requests covering fraud and standards and fraud and trading standards for the first 6 months of the year. This is all around communications data, and it goes on to explain what events data and entity data is. We can take questions, and sorry, maybe I should have explained this. This is about showing you and being transparent about the amount of activity that's taken place. We won't go into detail about the cases. For obvious reasons, they'll still be ongoing, but with David here especially, we could probably give you an example should you want to know the type of things that we would look for under those types of activity. But so in summary, no RIPA applications were received and even turned down, let alone approved during the first 6 months, and 6 NAFN requests. Happy to try and take any questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions?
Yes.
Councillor Finalized.
Yeah, Councillor Finalized. Thank you very much. It's just I've looked at the report, just as you quite mentioned, it's not very detailed. That's my concern. I would have expected such report to be very detailed. Looking at the first table, 3.1.3, trading standard from 2020 to 2021 and 2022, there's no activity. So I would say, why is there no activities? Does it mean that there's no such activities happening in the borough, or maybe because the department is not doing enough?
Chair, I'm happy to answer that. I mean, the council has a wide range of powers available to it to obtain information. Some of those are intrusive, and RIPA is one of those, but some of the other things we have access to is things like the Procedures of Crime Act. So in Trading Standards case, to prove a fraud perhaps that's taken place against a consumer, they could use a separate power rather than the intrusive option of going through RIPA. It may be that those cases are continuing, but they're simply using a different route rather than the ultimate, intrusive power of using surveillance or some other method. So it doesn't necessarily mean they're not doing anything, because they're very busy. It's just how they're approaching that particular case and making sure it's the most least intrusive way that will be impacting on members of the public.
So it's like some kind of, you have the trading standard doing it, you have all these, you have the fraud department, you also have the police actually also doing the same thing.
Yeah, indeed.
Also, I'm also concerned where it says 3.1.3, where it says the outcome of the above RIPA, directed surveillance authorization, cannot be summarized in detail because of the Data Protection Act. I would have thought that our role here, our responsibility, which deals with scrutiny, is not an exemption for us to be able to be previewed into the information of what is happening, particularly with regards to the prevention of crime. So we are entitled to have a detailed report.
If I may, Chair, these phases, if you like, in an investigation are actually quite early on normally. So surveillance could be to scope whether a crime has been committed. Doesn't necessarily mean one's going to be concluded the investigation. So it may be that when this report is written, these outcomes haven't been achieved yet. If I give an example from a fraud case, they sometimes run 3 to 5 years. So we may do surveillance in year 1, but actually in year 5, that's when we go to court, that's when we get an outcome. So that's probably why these reports aren't so detailed, because the person has a right to privacy that we're investigating. So until that outcome's been achieved, we simply can't share that information with members. I mean, as Sean said at the start, the reason this report is in actually as a result of the Surveillance Commissioner, to make sure that we follow the law that's been prescribed, and that is to make sure that members have the opportunity to see whether the applications made are refused, whether they're inaccurate, and actually whether or not the court, which is the ultimate arbiter, if you like, has refused them. And this report does tell members that. It's in very detailed We have a really good history. For me, I think the numbers speak quite highly of Thurrock. It is the ultimate intrusive power we use, and we use it very sparingly because we try to make sure that it's proportionate and balanced. I think that is actually, in my view, present in the report that we see today, and hopefully members can see that.
Yeah, I was just going to follow on from that. Yeah, this report isn't about how it's being used, just to be clear on that. I think it needs to be read in conjunction actually with David's report, which is the third item on this agenda in terms of the types of activity. We're not matching them together in terms of how David's team and the other teams have actually come to their conclusions in the work they're working on. This also goes through various judgments. It's not just the likes of myself that sign them off. I sign them off. They then have to go in front of the courts to be signed off as well before that power can be used. And we're also open to regular audits as well by the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office, who do audits on us, and we've reported the results of those audits back to this committee before as well. So there's a number of different routes into analysing this particular information.
What sort of criteria qualify for this action to start being taken?
So the law was changed about 3 years ago, and effectively there has to now be a serious crime. So the serious crime in law is defined as any offence where the starting point is custody of 6 months or more. So it's fraud, theft, corruption, that sort of stuff. Trading standards, consumer offences against the public, and it is the very high threshold which must be met if the case is proven. And again, as I said at the start, this is an investigation phase as opposed to perhaps proving it's taken place. So it may be in some cases, trading standards may do surveillance on a market trader that's selling counterfeit goods and actually find that they are legitimate goods and not counterfeit. So then investigation will cease, and then the person is allowed back to their own conduct. So it's a very high threshold we must meet.
And again, really just on the back of that, it's not just the threshold that myself as an authorising officer has to look at. We can't just have it going on forever and a day. There is a finite date for it. There are also review dates within it, just to ensure that it is actually doing what it said it was going to do, and it's not being intrusive as well to for instance, minors, on anybody you're looking at, and so on as well. So there's a great deal of that we go through the process with as well, just in other checks and balances.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, just interested to know with both types, fraud and trading standards, do you refer to other law enforcement agencies? I mean, for example, with the trading standards, are Border Force and HMRC involved, or the police? At what level do they come in, and do they inform the decisions you take?
Yeah, I mean, we work collaboratively, we have to, because, I mean, in my world, fraud, if they're committing one offence, they tend to be targeting multiple agencies and multiple victims, so you have to share intelligence. We do work jointly, particularly with Essex Police, and training standards are in the same boat as well, because we have 2 ports in our borough, a lot of goods coming through, some of them are counterfeit, and we actually have port officers based there that work with Border Force side by side. And again, if it gets to the stage where Ripper comes in, it will be a joint enterprise between us and other agencies. And again, you've got that additional checks and balances. We've got to convince them that actually it's the right approach to take, also as well as our own authorising officers. So it is quite a collaborative approach.
Excuse me, but it is the council that has the final say on whether you go forward with the Ripper request, for example?
It depends. So if it's a matter that we have a statutory duty to investigate, then it's our decision. If it's one that perhaps is Border Force's responsibility, the onus will be on them to approve that activity. And again, it just falls down to who's responsible for the investigation as opposed to the surveillance action.
Are there any other members wish to ask a question at all? No? Okay, so can we then turn to the recommendation, which is on page 15. And the recommendation just says to note the statistical information relating to the use of Ripper for the period April 2021 to September 2020. Is that noted?
We haven't.
Okay, thank you. We go on to item 6, which is on page 19. And that is internal audit. Is that Gary's going to, so Gary Hyatt, I believe you're going to present this report for us.
Thank you, Chair. First off, apologies that I'm not attending in person, but I've got quite a serious mobility issue with my back at the moment, so I can't drive at the moment. Taking you to the report itself, the progress report covers final reports issued since the last progress report, draft reports that have been issued, and work in progress. On page 20, we finalised 6 reports, one of which was an assurance report on planned maintenance in housing, which received a green positive opinion. And we've issued 5 reports around completion of work around the BSI ISO 9001 accreditation in environment. Areas covered were active and country parks, fleet, infrastructure and work environment, play area maintenance and street cleaning. We didn't find any major issues as a result of those that work. A common issue was around maximising income, but that's sort of expected due to the pandemic and would be common across all local authorities. This is being addressed as the services return to a different but more normal routine. 3.5, whilst advisory consultancy reviews do not give an actual assurance opinion, they do provide assurance to members around the policies, practices and procedures in the areas that are being looked at. As previously stated, we had one auditor leave in September. A business case has been developed and I'm just awaiting comments from my manager now, and that will be submitted to HR ASAP. Page 24 shows the status of reports finalised at draft stage and work in progress, the table. Work and other issues for which no reports are generated. We've carried on with the work around the Troubled Families programme and the BSI stuff, but that will potentially be impacted by the fact that that was carried out by the auditor who left. Although a senior auditor has already picked up on the Troubled Families work. The only change to the plan is that the audit around financial sustainability has been deferred due to corporate finance carrying out work to close the accounts. Page 25-28 provides a summary of findings and recommendations of final reports, and I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. Before I open up some questions, just want to ask you, you said you've got one auditor left September, but in the report here you said you've got 2 vacant audit posts.
Yeah.
Can you just confirm how many people you've got on your team now, what your, what the, if you feel that you're going to, will you be able to get one auditor recruited or 2?
We're currently 2 full-time and 1 term-time only auditor, including myself. We're looking to recruit 2 posts because we've actually had 2 people leave during the pandemic. So one was much earlier on last year. So we'll be looking to recruit 2 internal auditors.
Okay, and once you get the okay to recruit, can you give us a rough timeline of how long the recruitment process will take?
The recruitment process is likely to take slightly longer than it does for other posts because of the skill set of the internal auditors. So I'd be looking at probably 2 to 3 months.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
Yeah.
Councillor,
Councillor, a follow-on to the chair's question. You're looking to recruit 2 to 3 months' time. Don't you have a short solution to that? Possibly getting an agency staff to do the work, taking into consideration the importance of auditors.
We do have a framework agreement with Croydon where we can pull in additional auditors to pick up on some of the work. Yes, Councillor.
I think you have a framework with Croydon.
Yeah, it's a framework agreement where if we need additional staff, Croydon have a contract with Mazars, so we can get staff in from Mazars. We tend to use it for our IT audit work because we don't have any skilled IT auditors.
Yeah, but from here, you have clearly says that the one auditor who has left has had impact in the production of and also auditing. Don't you think you really need it? You need to approach Croydon to get you some support.
Yeah, it's something I need to look at and talk to Sean about.
Okay, I think it's something you need, obviously. We need to get this report together.
Chair, I'll pick up with Gary outside.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Chair.
I've got two actually. The first one is when we're looking at the planned maintenance for housing, you say that you're going to undertake a stock condition survey. Now it's some time since we had the last one. Is 30% going to be a big enough sample? That's on page 25. Can you hear us, Gary?
Yes, sorry, I'm just looking at the report.
All right.
Well, that's actually the response from the service. It's the service that's over the next 9 months will be looking at 30% sample. So that's their capacity.
Okay, so we're happy with that, are we, as a local authority?
Yeah, we would be, yeah, because you wouldn't be able to check 100% of stock in 1 year.
No, but 30 seems quite a low number considering it was 2017 to 18 the last time. But thank you. And my other question is, there's a couple of mentions here of people finding it difficult to track people's training. Has that been put right? Because it's in several things. That is it now on Oracle or whatever?
Yeah, that's around the BSI work. Yes, the service are working on getting all that put onto Oracle so that it's so that we can see it when we're there. It's not that the training wasn't being done; it's just the recording of it.
No, it's made quite clear in this. So thank you for the report, but I just wanted to know if it'd been put right because I know it can be quite frustrating if people can't find what they need. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Snell.
Actually, Councillor Baker's just covered my question, so I shall ask one.
Okay. Are there any other councillors?
I just want to know how the 30% of housing is selected. Is it a random sample? Will it be different to the 17-18 stock, or is it completely random?
It will be a random sample taken across the stock.
Yeah, I thought I was going to get a bit more. All right, thank you.
Are there any other questions in the report? Okay, we go to the recommendation, which is on page 19. Recommendation is to consider the reports issued and the work being carried out by the internal audit in relation to the 2021-22 audit plan. So we've done that, we're all happy, yeah? Okay, thank you, Gary. Hope you'll feel better soon.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We now need to move on to item 7, which is on page 29 of the agenda, and that is the County and Investigation Quarterly Update. And
Chair, thank you. Yes, thank you, Chair. So this report updates the committee on the progress made by the Counter Fraud Investigation team in delivering the council's counter fraud strategy. Page 30 of the report of the pack, outlines the flow of work that's come into the service in Q2 this year. It demonstrates that 90 reports have been received through the various meetings we have, which is internal reports, online and telephone. We have a breakdown of those reports, the 90, between the different sections we have, including what the outcomes have been for those investigations and those we were carrying already in the year. Positively, there's been some great outcomes for the service, including putting 3 social housing properties back into circulation that have been used as a result of fraud, and that demonstrates a saving £153,000 in that quarter alone, which is a large amount of money, obviously, for public money. Page 35 of the pack outlines the proactive work the service is doing. This is where we target specific areas of the council that may be at high risk, or particularly after COVID. Obviously recognising the amount of money the council gave out in grants, for example. It demonstrates that we are working with different council services to help them understand the risk, but also put mechanisms in place to find fraud and prevent it from happening in the future. I commented on the last meeting actually that the COVID system we put in place to test information against credit reference data has been really positive. And again, that's looking to roll out in other services, including teams like social care that also assess people's eligibility for care as well. And I'm obviously, of course, happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions then? Councillor Ralph.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the COVID funding that was given out. How are those investigations going forward? Is that actually in the report, the amount that you?
Yeah, we commented on the last meeting, so it is continuing. And again, sort of recognising the instructions that came out from BEIS, which is the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, councils were asked to give the money out and check later.
Yeah.
Thurrock took a different view, and we installed some counter fraud controls before the application was actually processed rather than retrospectively. That in itself stopped around about £350,000 of potential fraud that took place to date. It continues to take place with the existing applications we processed. So where we found a red flag, they're still being investigated. Because clearly it may be identity theft or some other means where someone's misusing one of our businesses in the borough, and that is ongoing as we speak. And again, that is where we comment in the counter fraud grants programme. That's that work that continues, and that will be included in the reports as we move throughout the financial year.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Snell.
Yeah, looking at the amount of housing fraud, there must come a point in time, I would imagine, when you start to see patterns in the type of fraud that's being committed. Is there anything you do proactively at the start of the process when you get on? I mean, in other words, what are the early signs that you can let's get on that quickly and stop the fraud getting worse and the council losing their money?
Yeah, I mean, Thurrock is quite unique actually, in that it has a really good amount of frontline staff still. They actually are housing officers, they're out in the estates and working with our residents. That, for me, is probably the easiest way to spot potential fraud. We do a lot of work and training with our estates caretakers and housing officers that go out on the estates, because clearly they can see if someone that normally lives in the property is not living there anymore, or there's a build-up of ASP or similar actions taking place. That tends to be our most focus, what we do to find social housing fraud, and equally our tenants are also very good at reporting suspicions as well. Obviously we have a very strong application process, so if someone wants to join the housing scheme, we check their information, we make sure it's accurate, and equally if there's any abuse in that process anyway, we also work with social care partners too to make sure we've got the whole story of people that apply for housing. And then equally at the back end of the life cycle, succession as well, succession fraud, where people may fraudulently try and apply to take over a tenancy. Again, we've got a very good team that work with the housing team and make sure that we identify those flags and can react quick enough to make sure we protect our assets, basically.
Sure.
I think the other thing David's team has done in more recent years is just all the awareness training across all of our sections. And you know, without going into the particular case or even the service, I just remember one that David found a few years back, where the service had actually identified it and had stopped making any payments and thought their job was done, right? Without actually thinking, no, this is a crime, it's a bigger issue and it's fraud. And actually when David came across it from a slightly different route from memory, we found out they'd done it in 4 different boroughs and it was still going on in the other 3. So I think in terms of that awareness and that training, you know, things like that just bring it out a little bit more about that wider importance. And as David said earlier, you know, if they're doing one thing, the chances are they're doing a number of things. And that was one particular example. So I think that's another part of your question. The awareness training around the authority is much better now than it was a few years ago.
Councillor Carter.
How do we compare to our statistical neighbours?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I've been involved in county fraud in local government for many years now, but about 10 years in fact. And one of the sad state of affairs is most councils now don't have a county fraud team. It actually sits within their internal audit function, and it carries on the line I know at the moment. It's a very different profession. People see it as the same, but it is different. We're dealing with crime, they're dealing with sometimes misinformation or a lack of information. And some authorities assume it sits within the same area. And I think that Thurrock has invested heavily in that, and the benefits speak for themselves. If we look down the road, we used to provide the service to Southend Council for them. After our work there, they've actually built quite a good effective team on the back of the stuff we do. Basildon's got a very small function, and again, some councils don't even report fraud in their audit committees either. If you look at the county, they don't. It's a closed session. The public don't see what the county do. We're very open here, and I think it's actually a testament to what we do at Thurrock.
I think, yeah, it's recognising the history, because it is a really good question. For first 25 years of my working life, I think every council had a fraud team, but it was all concentrated on housing benefits. And that was it. And then there was a turning point when universal credit came in, because to detect housing benefit fraud the power was taken away largely from local authorities and was taken into a national system. And local authorities, the majority of local authorities just got rid of their counter fraud teams at that stage, saying, well, that's it, the government's taken over, without actually recognising there was growing fraud. It had always been there really, but growing fraud. If you think about things like adult social care, we were moving away from just having people, this is very simplistic, so apologies, but moving away from just having people in homes to making direct payments into their homes and so on for the, etc. And that created, using just that as an example, a totally different approach. And David will have dozens more examples than that, but it's the one that always sticks in my mind, really. This council was at a crossroads when that happened, and it was a choice. We actually had to look and say, well, what's best for the authority? Do we actually go down to minimal or nothing, or do we actually grow it, recognising that it's a much bigger problem? And we went for the latter. Other authorities went for the former.
You've got a question.
Yes, I've got one on the, well, in reference, this is 90 cases of suspected fraud, and further down it says 144 active cases. So it's probably a conclusion I can draw that some previous quarters cases that are still going through.
Sorry, yeah, that's not that clear, but yes, most cases will cross financial years, even quarters. I think that's where we're carrying existing cases that may have been earlier in the year, or even further, as well as the 90 we've received in the last quarter alone. Yeah.
And I can see that the trend is that housing probably predominantly carries most of it. Is there much that can be done to bring in early intervention measures to probably do more screening up front, or do something better to reduce the numbers which keep growing?
It's a difficult area, and I think particularly with COVID, in terms of housing fraud, we kind of had to down tool to a certain extent, because where someone was perhaps subletting and they were living elsewhere, we were all told to stay in our homes. So to try and prove someone was subletting and living elsewhere for a different reason was very difficult. So we had to change our tactics. We've reactivated that work now. The country is, the restrictions are easing. And I think that is probably reflected in the figures there, is that there's still a case that we need to investigate, but to actually progress it at this time when the restrictions were in place was silly and impossible, because someone will say, well, I've been told to stay here, I can't leave this home. I'm looking after my, someone who's shielding, etc. So I think that, for me, is reflective of the numbers in the chart there.
And as far as the grant, the COVID grant fraud cases are concerned, does that pretty much have a reflection on how much comes back in to the council? So is there impetus to do more investigations there to recover more money? Yeah,
indeed. Again, as I said earlier, we had a different focus on preventing it, sort of stopping at the door, if you like, and we had some good success with that. It doesn't mean to say some didn't get through the net, because people can, nowadays you can buy identities on the internet. And a lot of the work we're doing ticks on organised crime. So we were one of 300 councils that fell victim to an organised crime attack on the grant scheme during COVID. It was impersonating a high street brand. They ended up impersonating 50 high street brands to pretend to say that they were eligible for a grant. We got all our money back, I'll make clear, actually, on that point, and we're leading the national response to that in terms of organised crime. We're paid for by BASE to do that for all councils in the UK. That brings us a lot of good activities for Thurrock, because we've got a wider investment in that investigative work. We're sharing that intelligence with services on the front line. So where we've got a pattern or a modus operandi, we're sharing that at the door, making sure that we're looking for that. Things like muling bank accounts, because eventually these crime groups will need to put the money somewhere, and they tend to use the same or similar bank accounts to launder the money through. And in fact, we set up a scheme here with all the clearing banks in the UK to find it for us. So if a council accidentally paid a company that's been muled, they stopped the transaction happening and gave us back the money, which again saved millions, and I mean millions of pounds in the UK, potentially losing the public purse. So we do work continually with the UK finance and government as well to stop grant fraud.
Any other questions? That's all right.
We ever chat about our successes? You just said about 50 companies in person. That should be something to shout and celebrate.
We do. It's very difficult because we're kind of acting as one of the big four accounting firms. So we deliver investigative services to government agencies who own that activity. We don't own it. So although we're providing that as a service, it's quite difficult to shout about it because it's not our work, if you like. It's not our responsibility. We are working with them to do that, because actually this year we're nominated for the Tackling Economic Crime Awards for that collaboration. We're a finalist. We find out next month whether we're a winner. And we certainly will be chatting about that if we do. And of course, again, I hope to do that. And again, I'll bring that back to members if we are successful. But yes, good point. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. We can turn to page 29 of the recommendation. The Standard and Audit Committee comments on the performance of the County Fraud Investigation Department. Everyone's had their chance to comment. Yeah? Okay. Alright. Now move on to item 8, which is the work programme. Jenny, do we have we need to let members aware of the accounts?
Yeah.
Yeah, if I may, and Rachel's from BDO, our external auditors, obviously on here. When we provided the initial training to the committee, and Rachel also gave a verbal update to the committee, we recognise the pressures that are going on with external audit across the country, actually in terms of resourcing, the knock-on from the COVID audits last year, in terms of the timescales. We should have been bringing the accounts and our external auditors' review of those accounts to this committee. That's not been possible because of the timescales and the levels of work still to complete, and especially in the letter I wrote to you, Chair, in terms of the review process that our external auditors need to carry out. We're no different. There's a lot of the majority of councils, I believe, around the country are like that, and certainly all the ones within Essex, I understand, at the moment as well. So what we're asking for is a special meeting in either January or February. We'll work on that date with Rachel and the BDO team as the work progresses and we near the end of that conclusion. I've no idea if I can't even see Rachel, but
she's on there.
I've no idea if you want to add to that, Rachel.
No, not particularly. I think you've covered off the issues. Just to reassure the committee that the work is progressing well, it is ongoing, and we are making good tracks into the amount of testing that we have got to do. But we've just not got to the stage where we're able to complete and report to you on our conclusions on that at this stage. So as Jonathan said, it's going to be a later date, which we'll work with you and agree on whatever works kind of best for you, and alongside those timescales for completion.
Thanks, Rachel, and Chair. So I think I think the conversation had been with you about possibly doing it on the 10th of March, which is the next meeting, and we're bringing reports back from BDO at that time anyway. But we're aware, obviously, that the accounts are quite a weighty item, and March on this item is also looking quite heavy. Hence the fact of looking to bring it forward, possibly on the 15th of February as a special meeting, just for the accounts.
Yeah, no, I think looking at the March agenda here, it does look quite heavy at the moment, and that's so that we can get a chance to give it the full attention. Maybe I know we're all busy, but you know, I think a special meeting would probably be one of the best ways to go ahead. So, you know, if we could, if we, as soon as we can, if we've got potential dates in mind, just sort of an email to say it could be this day, just so that people could provisionally put it in their diaries, and then it could be confirmed.
If we, through you, Chair, sorry, looking at Jenny, if we put out a hold calendar invite straight to everybody anyway, so it's in your calendars and you can see it, but it will be a hold one at this stage.
Sure. How much time do you think you get to peruse that before we have to come to committee?
The agenda will have to be printed 7 days beforehand, as normal.
Yeah, any chance of getting it a little bit early, perhaps? Because it's usually a waiting time.
I think it'd be
it's normally waiting.
Probably asking too much, but
let's have a look at what we can send out earlier rather than later, certainly.
Yeah, going on from Councillor Stairs' point, I don't know about other members, but my agenda didn't come until Tuesday for the meeting. Yeah, so, I mean, we're lucky, you know, obviously lucky that it's not a heavy agenda this evening, but if it had been, then I think panic would be mild panic would be second.
Yeah, I mean, it's always online. We do publish online as well, so there is an option, but yeah, I mean, we can only publish it and it gets posted, so.
So when with them, just going to speak online, when with when is the report released online? I know it obviously.
It'll be 7 days before the meeting.
Right. Okay.
7
so
on a day.
Online 7 days, and then it will be. Obviously, we're in the. You know, we need to sort of, obviously it's going through the post, isn't it? So because we're not allowed, we can't come in and pick it up.
No, but I can make an arrangement like I delivered yours. If people wanted me to deliver them or meet them in the foyer, I can.
So if you prefer that for that meeting, because it would be quite a weighted document, I would be nice if we just email. Then you let her know the time that is convenient for both parties. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
Jenny's
I'll have a cup of tea at everybody's house.
It's all liaised before in different corners of the bar.
Yeah. Is there anything else on the work programme that is not on there that needs to be put in, or?
No, they're just statutory reports that come every that quarter. So.
Okay. Are members happy with what's on the work programme for March?
Substantial matter.
Chair, sorry. Can I just say that on the March agenda there is the external audit plan and the annual audit letter. The annual audit letter is not a thing anymore. It's been replaced, so that will come. The document that replaces that will come 3 months after within 3 months of issuing the audit opinion. So I don't know. We probably need to think about what committee that goes to, and the external audit plan. If we've only just finished the audit, we won't be issuing that plan until a later committee. So I think those two things probably need to think about what committees they go to as well. So that should lighten your agenda slightly.
Okay, thank you. So would they be going on to like the next?
Yeah, there'll be a next. They're probably June or July of 22.
Yeah.
Sorry, Rachel. Was there a time you said 3 months after the completion of the accounts? Was it within 3 months, or was it up to 3? What was it?
So the deadline is that we have to issue the auditor's annual report within 3 months of the date of issuing the opinion. So
and
whatever time.
is that issued to the council, or is that have to be reviewed by the committee?
That is published, so it's a public document, so it has to be published within 3 months of that date. So we need to have gone through the review processes ahead of that 3-month date.
Yeah, I'm just looking. Obviously, we go into elections and PERDA during the period. So yeah, we'll.
So that will need to come to this March committee then.
So March is the ideal time before we hit the PERDA deadline. Otherwise, we're right in the middle of it. Yeah, but we let's take that offline, Rachel. Then, and we'll inform Jenny in terms of the work plan, and yeah, we just be clear about those dates. It's fine.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you. Any other? No? Okay. So with that then, I will close the meeting. Just finish what I should have done at the beginning of the meeting, sorry, and welcome Councillor Ralph, because I believe you're substituting for Councillor Collins, aren't you? Sorry, I apologise.
That's all right.
But thank you everyone, have a safe journey home everyone, and I know we're not going to see each other till March, so that's really early, I'm going to see you so this, but
Thank you, Chair.
Hopefully.
Good night, all.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Your mum would just be that quick then.